And John Martin informs me that while I may not be the man who needs no introduction, I am the man who gets no introduction this morning. So I will just start. This is the third of 4 talks that I'm presenting on Friday mornings here at Elkis Manfredi. You see them on the screen. I hope most of you caught the earlier talk on placemaking thought, the authors who are the foundation of placemaking concepts, and the one on placemaking form, the architectural solids and voids in the city and how they're composed to create place. Elkis Manfredi is videoing these, and hopefully they'll be available soon if you have missed one. Zutalora have missed one, because they all do, I think, tie together. So next Friday I'll conclude with a 4th talk about what we mean by the term sense of place. And if I could hype that a little bit, I think, humbly, that it's a very important talk. And it'll feature information on the latest brain research that gives credence to all of the earlier thought that I've talked about in the previous 2 lectures. So as I say, let me hype that a bit and urge you all to attend next week. But today, this 3rd lecture concerns activity and use in the public realm, particularly in retail-based environments, how they help create distinctive and attractive public spaces and help turn space into place. And as this cartoon makes clear, not all places are right for all activities, and it's our job as architects in designing mixed-use projects and in designing the public realm to try and make sure that the form that we design meets the requirements of and supports those activities. Remember from lecture 1, Jan Gale's chart classifying human activity into necessary, optional, and social categories. He observed that necessary activities like commuting to work happen regardless of environment, but optional activities like window shopping and social activities like dining out with friends are greatly influenced by the quality of their environment. And remember that Gale maintains that the types of activities, the frequency or number of them, and the length of them can all be influenced by good design. He says that Life Between Buildings, the title of his first book, that the successful and vibrant urban public space is a product of number of activities times the length of those activities. And in his book, Path Portal Place, Edward T. White posits that place design can prohibit, impede, discourage, allow, promote, or create activities. I present them here as a range on a VU meter. When we design public open space, we should clearly be trying for the positive side of his range. Ed White also wrote, quote, "Activity is created by a place when human nature meets environmental opportunity to bring about human behavior," unquote. Now, I don't believe that activity can actually be created by design, but I'm comfortable with the word promote. And at the top end of White's scale, maybe I'd substitute the word incubate. But the notion of human nature meeting environmental opportunity, let me say that again, human nature meeting environmental opportunity is an important one, because human beings have certain predispositions that we as designers should observe and recognize them when we see them in situ. Nobody sits in the middle, everyone clings to an edge, people prefer movable chairs over fixed benches, we prefer left-right symmetry, we scan for faces, we seek prospect and refuge spots, we're repelled by featureless buildings, we feel lost on undefined sidewalks and streets, etc., etc., etc. The research is there. And once you become aware of it, you can't walk by, I can't walk by, a living, breathing example of human self-selection without noticing it and often photographing it. I bitch all the time that architects ignore these principles in pursuit of reinventing the wheel. The top 2 photos I took showing that people don't sit on benches if there are better places to sit available nearby. The bottom one appeared in Architectural Record, unbelievably. It's intended to show how fabulous the little gray pavilion is, but amazingly the editors didn't even see what's right in front of them, that people are literally repelled by it and sit nearer the warm-colored and more detailed brick building. So as we look at all of the various, it just blows my mind that somebody would put that in a magazine, put that picture in a magazine to show how fabulous this little gray building is. And it's like it's radioactive. People are trying to get as far away from the bottom. And they don't even see it. So as we look at all the various activities possible in urban public space, let's keep in mind that as placemakers, we are doing so in order to make sure our designs for a space's physical attributes can accommodate, support, and even promote and incubate those activities. Now, there are many who believe that what you really need to change space into place is for activity to happen there. In fact, if you Google the term placemaking, half of the references are to organizations that plan organized community building events in public spaces. This event-based stuff is usually called creative placemaking. The Project for Public Spaces is probably the most vocal advocate for this school of thought. They published this assessment diagram to encourage and allow people to evaluate the public spaces in their towns. And note that even though only the upper right quadrant is labeled uses and activities, almost all the chart's characteristics actually relate to uses. Very little of their concern is with architectural form. And I'm not belittling what they do. What they do is great, but it's really place repair. We as architects are talking about place design. We're often creating something out of nothing, out of whole cloth, or we're trying to react to a partial context. PPS's attitude reminds me of that old Steve Martin joke where he says he's teaching a course on how to be a millionaire. First, get $1 million. Their approach to place repair seems to be first get a place. What we're doing is we don't have a place yet. So, as should be obvious by now, that is not what I mean by placemaking. I believe that space transforms into place through synergy of form, use, and meaning. This is the three-legged stool that I refer to throughout these talks. But use and activity is one of those legs of what we're here to focus on today. So let's get to it. So what are these activities that we're designing for? What's our program brief, if you will, for active urban public spaces? And this is another interesting thing, that usually when you get a brief, when you get a program, the program talks about physical needs of defining room sizes, but it doesn't talk about really the activity that the owner wants to have happen there. And I think that's an important thing also, that architects need to ask what is the activity that we're trying to encourage and accommodate, particularly in public open spaces. So let's apply a little rigor to our discussion. There are three major categories of human activity in public open spaces: unprogrammed activities, semi-programmed activities, and programmed activities. Unprogrammed activities are those that people initiate on their own as part of their individual use of the space, things like talking, sitting, relaxing. For them to occur regularly, the characteristics of the space must resonate with human predispositions. It must feel friendly, offer spatial definition, be occupiable in a way that we subconsciously behave and see. Holly White posited that these behaviors were the yardstick for measuring successful places. Semi-programmed activities are similar, but they require the availability of some specific facility. Window shopping, outdoor dining are good examples. Programmed activities are those that require a sponsor, a license, or some planning and organization to occur. These include street performances, group exercise classes, seasonal markets, and the like. So let's first look at the unprogrammed activities, the things that people do spontaneously on their own if the space feels right. Here you see slides of various behaviors that occur in successful public spaces, including some of the black and white photos from when Holly White set up his cameras on New York sidewalks and plazas. The test for public space success is whether it allows or fosters these behaviors, whether people feel comfortable enough to engage in them, whether they have the necessary accommodations to do so. As a designer, you should ask yourself, does the space between your buildings have the right characteristics for these to occur? People also initiate semi-programmed activities if certain public facilities are present, simply the setting out of things that encourage it. Public chess games are a good example. All that's needed is a table. People will bring their own chess pieces, or sets can be kept at a nearby merchant or concierge for loan. Chess is a non-intrusive activity that draws both participants and onlookers. Boston's Post Office Square encourages the use of its lawn by making seat cushions available at lunch, and people spontaneously played the pianos set out in Boston squares during the Play Me I'm Yours program a couple of years ago. Clyde Warren Park in Dallas has a reading room, sponsored by the Morning News. It's just a rack of general interest books and magazines, anything that encourages people to sit and lengthen their stay. Toilet facilities in sidewalk kiosks or in rooms tucked near transit hubs or parking garage doors Make it feasible for people to remain for long periods of time. They're especially important for those with babies or young children, and they must be clean and safe. Public Wi-Fi is essential these days to encourage people to lengthen their stay in public places. Remember, it's not just the number of occupants that creates liveliness, but the amount of time they spend in the space. You'll need to plan for power and repeaters. And don't forget pets. Dog owners do everything with their pet, including shop or get coffee. Fenced-in dog parks attract a crowd, as can public watering stations. I'm sure you've seen merchants set out water and biscuits to attract pet lovers, and you've witnessed the triangulation effect of strangers stopping to pet someone else's dog and strike up a conversation. I plan dog drinking fountains into our mixed-use projects. A bit of whimsy can also encourage open space activity by making an event of a necessity. Some examples here show, clockwise from the lower left, little tables that facilitate stair sitting, basket-like pods that encourage sitting in Times Square, a swing that makes waiting for a bus more fun, a slide as an alternate to descending a long set of Plaza steps, colorful painting making art out of a crosswalk, stairs that double as a resting place with built-on seating, and another set of stairs made into a musical event with a clever paint job. Some of the most prevalent semi-programmed activity is retail-based. Public behaviors like window shopping, newsstand browsing, and shopping at outdoor displays. So when you're working, plan wide sidewalks with defined zones that permit people to stop and look in windows without being bumped. Plan nooks and crannies along the storefront line that allow merchants to offer outdoor displays that animate the public space. Plan areas for kiosks and sales carts. Locate them where people will be led past them, along natural pedestrian desire lines between destinations like parking cores, anchor tenants, or transit. And that's another thing that I would say is understand what uses are destination uses and what uses are purely optional. Because if somebody's going to a movie, particularly these days, they've pre-bought the ticket. They're going to see that movie at 9 o'clock. You know they're going to walk a certain path if you've had them park or arrive someplace and you put the cinema someplace else. If you planned your facility properly, you put those two things almost as far away from each other as they can be, and certainly so that people have to drag themselves by all the optional storefronts. So the king of retail-based semi-programmed activity is alfresco dining. It animates exterior public spaces at many times of the day, and people spend long periods of time there. Diners watch the passers-by, and they watch the diners. Everyone is drawn by food and drink. John Gale even quantified a dramatic growth in the number of cafe chairs in resurgent cities as an indicator of urban vitality. He literally counted the cafe chairs. He dubbed this the cappuccino effect. First, identify likely restaurant spaces on a merchandising plan. Then plan sufficient sidewalk width adjacent to them. Are there resources, recesses, or corners available? What about sun and shade, heat in cold climates and misters in hot ones? Are there canopies and arcades to carry them? Are alfresco dining spots placed where they'll most activate the adjacent space? Hint, they work especially well when located across from one another, the so-called dueling restaurant arrangement. Where liquor laws require a barrier between dining tables and the sidewalk, use the least visually obstructive devices possible and make sure the diners can face the passers-by at least sideways. Civic facilities also generate semi-programmed activity. The vast majority of European piazzas face a church or city hall. Although it's hard in these cash-strapped times, private developments that include civic facilities can leverage the activity that they generate. At Shirlington Village outside DC, for instance, a public library was the focus of the mixed-use development's retail Main Street, and Seaside, Florida was famously developed around a small post office. On a smaller scale, ATMs, mailboxes, FedEx and UPS drop boxes, or now Amazon's yellow delivery boxes, perform a similar function in public space. Telephone booths used to work before the age of cell phones. Now let's turn to programmed activities, those that require a sponsor or an organizer. On the screen you see a programming pyramid, 4 categories of programmed activities that my development company tries to provide when planning our retail-oriented mixed-use projects. Daily characteristics are the foundation, things that people who visit the public space within our projects will find every day. Things like street performers and distinctive vendors. Some, like board games, book carts, and Wi-Fi, are in my semi-programmed category. These are key to encouraging people to make our space a habitual part of their daily lives. Closely related are community facilities and programs, allowing the project to host gatherings like mothers groups, senior fitness groups, bicycle clubs, bird watchers, etc. If the place can act as the home for the community interest, then the participants are more likely to build a roll forward in their life and frequent it when the group isn't meeting there. Regularly scheduled events are things like a weekly farmer's market, Friday movies in the park, Wednesday dance classes. In retail spaces, leverage the merchants. A bike shop can sponsor a bike race. A kitchen shop can sponsor cooking classes. A wine shop can sponsor a tasting. Extravaganzas are things like the Christmas tree lighting, a summer concert series, spring car shows or fashion shows, and 4th of July fireworks. Sienna's Polio horse race is the classic example of a major extravaganza. But you can't just have the extravaganzas. You need to foster and sponsor activities at all 4 levels in order to appeal to multiple people at multiple hours of the day throughout the year. We want people to come to our developments because something is always going on. What's important for us as designers to think about is these activities and uses and provide the physical opportunities for them and for the facilities that support them. So let's look in a bit more detail at programmed activities that help to turn public space into place. Street performers are an example of programmed daily characteristics. They attract people to the place, generate a festival energy, provide a catalyst for triangulation, and thus define a place as a destination. Make sure there are good spots for them in the site plan. Hint, it's where they'll get the most money. Plan for the act and the spectators, the 12-foot social comfort distance semicircle that John Gale documented. Note on this slide those street performers that impart a distinctive place-based personality to the space, like Yawkey Way's baseball stilt walker. And note those performances that change over time, like chalk artists. These examples from Florence illustrate the allure of an evolving street performance. The trompe l'oeil example on the right was fascinating and forced us to stop and watch the process for a period of time. The photos on the left, one taken at midday and the other at night, show that we came back to check on the artist's progress and tipped her both times. Evolving performances encourage a lengthier stay. More visits over more time equals more activity. Street musicians are a special type of street performer. Street corner folk singers, strolling musicians, and lunchtime concerts are all examples. Musicians can work well and profitably on busy corners or a bit apart from outdoor dining areas. They can serve as lunchtime draws in small parks or as the focus of a nighttime festival. As a designer, think of what facilities you might build into a public space that would support and incubate street musicians. A slightly elevated area that can serve as a stage at certain hours, or a place with good acoustics. Tracy Chapman got her start singing in the recessed entry to the Harvard Coop, and Lisa and I saw the arcades of Place de Vosges attract high-quality classical musicians during our trip to Paris. Both were drawn to their public performance spots by their acoustics. When was the last time you thought of acoustics when you were designing a building? The outdoor acoustics. Sometimes you can encourage or incubate specialty vendors just to have a mark of distinction, so your place is different than others. In the center, you see such an effort that Rick Caruso made for Americana at Brand. He restored an old good humor truck, not only to be something unique, but to play on the memories of baby boomers and the desires of their children. Caruso's sons ran the bicycle-powered soda pop business. Is there something in the regional culture that is or can be turned into a mark of distinction? Some indigenous examples are the street-side artists selling paintings on Place de Terre in Paris's Montmartre district, and the Gullah sweetgrass basket makers in Charleston, South Carolina. Like the fish throwers at Seattle's Pike Place, they can become identified with the place and become a reason that people visit. Distinctive transportation can also become a placemaker. The bateau in Paris, mule and buggy in Charleston, cable cars in San Francisco, paddle-wheeled riverboats in Savannah, and Boston's own swan boats are good examples. The Montmartre funicular is the shortest line on the Paris metro system, from the bottom of the hill to the top. Similar trams in Naples, Quebec, and Colombia, gondolas in Barcelona, and escalators in Taiwan are all strongly associated with their places. The Hub Bike Share program, while not distinctive to Boston, is one of a growing number of sustainable transportation programs facilitating connections between plazas and districts. Getting a bike stand in your public space can be a simple way to make it a destination for cyclists. Many of these examples also provide an attraction for kids, and most start to transcend their transportation use and create an emotional bond between their riders and the place. An example from my work for Rick Caruso, initially growing out of a desire to link the shopping complexes to their surroundings, to the farmer's market at the Grove and to Glendale's Brand Boulevard in Americana, Caruso had trolleys built and tracks laid in his retail centers. They now function on their own as an attraction and are closely identified with the developments. Moving up the pyramid, the community facilities and programs category allows your space to function as the host for special interests. Here I show you examples of Mommy and Me classes in Bryant Park, tango dance lessons in London's Paternoster Square, bird watchers in Bryant Park, and a massive yoga event in Times Square. We try to plan a lounge and conference room into our projects. These serve as a man cave during shopping hours, but are available to groups by reservation so that we can be the home for community interests. The regularly scheduled activities category consists of programmed events and attractions usually organized for larger groups. These are things like music concerts, movie nights, book fairs, and outdoor markets. They attract people who might not otherwise be in the space. They come for the event, stay, and return. Learning opportunities like authors' readings or cooking classes are effective. And don't forget children's group activities like puppet shows, storytelling, field days, craft programs, and face painting. They also bring the parents. At the top of the pyramid are seasonal events. Fundraising organizations can make great sponsors of events such as jack-o'-lantern festivals, Christmas markets, and spring plant sales. One of my favorites here in Boston are the Italian feasts that are held in August in the North End. We were just at the Madonna della Cava feast this past Saturday with some friends. Seasonal decorations like Main Street holiday lights and Memorial Day flag displays also contribute to public space activation. Your streetlight poles should support them, so pick compatible poles and specify banner brackets. And there's nothing more important in a retail setting than the Christmas tree and its lighting ceremony. Plan a location for the tree. In a review of space activating uses, I must mention food, glorious food. As Holly White wrote, if you want to seed a place with activity, put out food. Public markets are great examples as they make shopping an event. They're usually in purpose-built structures designed to create walkways and internal booths devoted to multiple leaseholders. It seems as if there's a market in a city that Lisa and I visit, we always end up there. One of my favorites is Mercado San Miguel in Madrid, and it's a good model for a small-sized public market. It's in a 1916 iron and glass pavilion that was restored in 2004. The building measures only 80 feet by 150 feet and houses 33 merchants and a central interior space for dining. There's a small adjacent piazza where you can take food for alfresco dining. Of course, here in Boston, we have our own example at Quincy Market. Single-tenant stores that look like public markets can bring the same energy to public places. They borrow the look of public markets and adopt their organization of the floor into separate stalls selling distinct categories of food, even though they're all under a single ownership. The godfather of these public market themed stores is the food hall at Harrods Department Store in London, in existence since 1834. Dean and DeLuca and Italy are well-known contemporary food hall examples. Like public markets, they work particularly well in a pedestrian-oriented urban space and have the ability to act as an anchor for a larger shopping district and successfully add an entertainment component. Since these are food merchants, good delivery access and trash removal are a major consideration. They should be adjacent to loading docks, and refrigerated dumpsters must be provided and be truck accessible. A similar activator of exterior public space is the farmer's market. Don't confuse farmers markets with public markets. They're similar but different concepts. Public markets are interior, farmers markets are exterior. They're also temporal, meaning that they don't occur at all times during regular business hours. The Campo de Fiori market in Rome is set up only in the mornings. The New York, San Francisco, and other city farmers markets only occur on weekends and only seasonally. Boston's Haymarket is a Friday-Saturday example that we're all familiar with. Flea markets are similar. The El Rastro market only occurs on Sundays. Goods are trucked to the market site and then taken away, as are the tents, stalls, and kiosks. This means that the plaza or street space they occupy is regularly used and must function for other purposes. When planning connections between streets and plazas, look for opportunities to devote an area to a market during certain days and plan so that this use doesn't impede traffic or block important sight lines and shop fronts. Often successful public spaces will leverage a public market hall or a market-themed food retailer to create a larger attraction, synergistically locating a farmer's market in immediately adjacent outdoor space. Farmers markets also work well with certain restaurateurs. Adjacent locations can be leveraged to support farm-to-table dining concepts and healthy lifestyle merchant concepts. And finally, there's the recent food truck phenomenon. Food trucks can be located singly at street corners to serve a particular dining need, or they can be ganged together in special places to create a festival atmosphere. The examples I show here are at Boston's Sowa Market, where an office parking lot is used on weekends, and at Clyde Warren Park, where a row of parallel parking spaces is reserved for licensed food trucks every day during the lunch hour. Try to double-purpose street and plaza space and use hard paving so that when the trucks drive off, the space can easily be hosed down. The big advantage that farmers markets and food trucks both bring is the infusion of activity and energy into the public space, and the sense that the market hours are an event not to be missed, making the place a destination. Of course, I shouldn't present a lecture on the activation of public space and the distinctive marking of place without mentioning the importance of public art. This was the impetus for Camillo Sitt's book, after all. I feel, personally, that the primary obligation of art in a public urban context is to enrich the experience of everyday life. Public art can be traditional or contemporary. It can make social commentary, but it shouldn't be subversive or threatening. It can certainly be its artist's expression, but it has a larger social obligation than to simply be one person's voice. There's a contemporary trend towards using lots of text. Boston's Holocaust Memorial is an example, and one of the better examples. And another trend towards temporary installations. From a placemaking perspective, I'm not a big fan of either, as they undercut art's imageability and associated utility as a place marker. If public art is to be temporary, it works best as a curated and revolving show in a designated location, so that people know that there's always some art to be found there. The mural program on Boston's Dewey Square event building is an example. One trend in public art that I do like is the use of culturally common items with a wry and modern attitude, since they leverage the cultural meaning associated with the object, and you see examples of that here on the right. I also feel that public art can make the most meaningful contribution to the locus solus of a place by memorializing, explaining, or embodying a location's particulars. This often means a theme that refers to the distinct nature or history or attributes of a place. I favor public art that is place-specific and feels like it shouldn't be anywhere else. Another trend that I like is public art that is physically engaging, like the James Curley and Kevin White statues 2 slides previous. This often takes the form of a sculpture that people can manipulate, occupy, sit next to, or sit on, especially children. The Make Way for Ducklings statue in Boston's Public Garden, with my granddaughter Quinn astride the smallest duck, she's 5.5 now, has a strong place-based component, memorializing the well-known children's book by placing the ducks on the story's exact route. Another example is the lemonade stand sculpture at the Grove. It depicts children, the developer Rick Caruso's kids, by the way, selling lemonade behind upturned fruit crates. The youngest girl holds a hose that streams real water into her open dog's mouth. Children love this statue because they can physically interact with it, getting behind the crates to pretend that they are assisting with the lemonade sales and playing with the water stream. Wangen, Germany's Salmarkt Plaza, on the site of the traditional pig market, has a sculpture of St. Anthony, the patron saint of pig farmers, with pigs and piglets. One piglet is rolling in a puddle that's formed in an intentionally designed paving depression whenever it rains. 2 more piglets have run off down the street. St. Anthony and the larger pigs are ideal for children to engage with and climb on. The public art recalls the original use of the square, provides a play activity for kids, and serves as a conversation starter for White's triangulation process. Now, these are not cutting-edge artistic statements, granted, but they work to help make and mark memorable places. Which brings us to memory, emotion, and meaning. Architects have been debating the importance of memory in design for ages, and I'll get more into this next week in my sense of place talk. but I do want to take this opportunity to point out that some activities fall into the category of ritual, whether it's throwing a coin in the Trevi Fountain, rubbing the boar's nose in Florence, kissing under a bridge in Venice, or kissing the Blarney Stone. Local ritual is a great example of transcending activity to foster emotion and to create a personal bond with a space. Even stupid human tricks like manipulating a snapshot to make it appear that you're holding up the Leaning Tower of Pisa, or high-fiving the statues in Piazza Navona, or even me recreating Gregory Peck's Mouth of Truth scene in Roman Holiday, they all create a personal bond with place. So let me pivot from activities to activity, specifically the act of walking with a defined urban place and what characteristics support it. In the age of computer apps like WalkScore, we generally refer to these characteristics as contributing to a place's walkability. According to Jeff Speck, author of Walkable City, there are 4 characteristics that an environment must offer to have walkability. The walk must be useful, safe, comfortable, and interesting. By useful, Speck means that there must be reasons to walk, the necessary optional and social behaviors that John Gale categorized. They must be compact, best provided in close proximity to each other in mixed-use environments and within 5 to 10-minute walk circles. And they must be well connected with access to parking, bike lanes and bike share, transit nodes, etc. By safe, he means both perceived safety and real safety. Perceived safety is the presence of the physical characteristics of place that Oscar Newman wrote about in his book, Defensible Space. I don't have time to go into those here, but I urge you all to at least read a summary. Real safety is the presence of things like street trees and parallel parking that protect pedestrians from traffic, narrow streets and small corner radiuses that slow car speeds, and no swoopiness, the stream-form designs that typify limited access roadways on which drivers are not cued to look for pedestrians. If it looks like a highway, drivers will drive on it like it's one. By comfortable, he means walks along good edges with places to sit and stand and lean, walks that offer prospect and refuge aesthetics, through places with good spatial definition and zoned sidewalks. To be interesting, Speck says that there must be signs of humanity, the presence of other people assured by uses that are active at different times of the day, and distributed entries to pulse people onto the sidewalks at different places. Walks with continuity, no missing teeth in the street wall. Walks with visibility, with lots to look at through open facades and storefronts. And with sequence, a cadence of different stimulus tied to our walk and blink rates. Remember from lecture 1 what Gordon Cullen taught us about serial vision and the way that we can shape building placement to make the walk interesting and connected. When you want people to walk on a long route, remember what Jan Gale and Chris Alexander taught us about the importance of establishing intermediate destinations, eye targets that break the route into digestible segments and lead the pedestrian along from point to point to point. And try to at least get the basics right. Shown here in Houston at intersections near our Regent Square mixed-use development site, that city's history of near total disregard for the pedestrian leads traffic engineers to make room on the sidewalks for nearly everything except the human being. So now let's turn from activities and activity to the design of retail-based places in which they are both supported and incubated. The critical aspect of creating great retail-oriented places is the careful and strategic planning of the building facades and storefronts and streetscape together. In order to achieve this integration, to transform space into place, placemaking must be at the center of a clearly articulated design mission. That mission must be place-based, not building-based. It's the pedestrian experience that's paramount. This requires that the texture and quality of materials, the rhythm of facades, distances between buildings, types of public space, signage, lighting, paving, plantings, and a host of other components all be thoughtfully designed and scaled for the pedestrian. And in my talk here, I'll work from the edges to the center of such places. These slides should look familiar to some of you here at Elkis Manfredi. The edges of retail districts are primarily defined by their storefronts, and there are 3 basic ways that buildings greater than 1 story in height relate to their storefronts, or 3 basic types of retail expression. Chris Milne, who used to work here at Elkis Manfredi, helped categorize these as autonomous, common expression, and integrated retail. In the autonomous retail category, which we sometimes refer to as chiclets, the retail base is read independently. There's a clear separation of the street level retail from the building above. This provides maximum flexibility for the tenant's storefront articulation, and it allows for and almost demands individual retailer expression. Next are buildings that have common expression of retail in the overall building structure. Here, the storefront employs a common architectural language with the building at street level. Common expression facades also have a clear separation of street level retail. They preserve some flexibility for the tenant's storefront articulation, but their storefront geometry is limited by the structural iteration. Here, storefronts can be tenant provided, infill set within the building's frame. The third retail facade type is integrated retail. In this category, the storefront is incorporated into and determined by the building framework. Here, the street level is an integrated part of the overall building facade. The tenant's storefront is usually a base building component, and the tenant has no flexibility. Individual expression is limited to added elements such as canopies, awnings, signage, etc. And while the tenant might prefer every building to be an autonomous type, and the architect might be drawn towards the integrated type, ideally, a retail precinct has examples of all three of these facade types in order to provide a variety of experience, a variety of scale, and to enable various leasing strategies and tenant prominence. For example, we consciously worked all three types into the Grove at Farmers Market and the Americana at Brand projects, using the model of a train station for the large building at the Farmers Market. And as Rob Halter knows, we're doing the same thing in Atlanta, as I constantly force these guys to design different types of facades. They don't want to all be the same. Building facades also employ a variety of overall design approaches. I show you three basic types: wall facades, in which the windows are punched unit openings; frame facades, in which the opaque facade components read more like a grid; and sculptural facades. I'm not showing you Frank Gehry-like buildings that use overall structural massing, because they usually don't make good retail buildings, nor do they serve to define public space well in good retail environments. All of these buildings are viable retail buildings. Again, try for a mix of all three, as long as they're designed with ground level storefronts in mind. However, the sculptural facade approach, as evidenced by the two I show you here on the right, usually requires a hard break at the ground floor. Often the ground floor is articulated as a void in order not to compete with the sculpture above. This first floor recess is the least compatible with the prominence that retailers want, and it's the most at odds with individualized trade dress that many of them insist on. These facade types can also be composed in different fashions. Obviously, they can be designed to stress the vertical, to stress the horizontal, or to express a hybrid of vertical and horizontal, or a hybrid of wall and frame, or frame and sculpture. Vertical is better for retail, by the way. Facades are often divided into zones. The vertical zoning most used is the classic base, middle, top composition. All of this variety is good in a retail-oriented district and has great applicability to storefront expression, as we will now see. Since most retail stores occupy the ground floor, and since it's where the pedestrians are, the most important design task in a retail district is to define the base of the building. It can be defined in a number of ways. You can vary its plane from the rest of the building, either by bringing it forward or setting it back. On the left, you see examples of pop-outs, where the plane of the base has been brought forward of the remainder of the building above. This easily works with the autonomous retail approach, allowing individual segments of the base, the chiclets if you will, to be customized for each tenant. On the lower right, you see an example of a setback base at Elkis Manfredi's City Place project, resulting in an arcade. Arcades also offer pedestrian protection from the sun in hot climates and from rain or snow in cold climates. And they're a key component of the Roman armature thing that I talked about in lecture 2. Arcades can be articulated as their own element, or can carry the architecture of the building down to the street while allowing the tenant to customize his recessed storefront. As you can see from this photo, though, storefront visibility from the vehicular street is compromised when they're recessed in arcades, although it's fine from the pedestrian point of view. The base can also be defined by a hybrid of the two approaches, with the pop-out of an applied arcade. As you can see on the upper left, this can allow for a thinner structure and makes for more storefront visibility while simultaneously protecting the pedestrians from weather and defining the base as a distinct zone. Material, color, and detail can also be used to define the retail base of a building. Often all three are used in combination. One famous example of this is Louis Sullivan's Carson Prairie Scott building in Chicago, where the material changes from terracotta to cast iron, the color changes from white to green, and the detail changes from smooth and rectilinear to Sullivan's distinctive organic ornament. Traditionally, stone, brick, wood, cast iron, and of course glass are used to distinguish the ground floor from the upper stories, and detailing like brick coursing, banding, texture, rustication, panelization, and other ornamental features are used to vary the identity of the ground floor. And remember John Gale's edge effect from my previous lectures. All of these retail facade strategies should be in the furtherance of creating active, friendly public space perimeters, what Gale terms soft or sticky edges. Let me re-emphasize, as Gale does, that these edges should consist of smaller vertical facades or multiple bays on larger ones, so that there's variety, diversity, and an iterative beat to the changing experience as the pedestrian walks along the edge. Horizontal facades are death for retail. People's average walk rate and average blink rate means that new visual information should be presented every 15 to 25 feet. And in the retail world, there's something known as the 5-second rule. A storefront has 5 seconds to tell its merchandise story, another term that merchants use, or the pedestrian will be past the door before their subconscious tells them to turn in. In addition, retailers like to be able to frame their merchandise stories. So undifferentiated facades, even if they're all butt glazed, actually aren't desirable. And you handcuff your leasing efforts because there are no natural breaks for lease lines and tenants feel that they share someone else's frontage. It is, however, important that ground level facades be as open as possible, so sills should be kept low, and the framing elements that you do have, like columns and piers, should not get too wide. So we've looked at the strategies to use when designing the building facades that sympathetically accommodate varied and flexible storefronts. Now let's look specifically at the individual tenant storefront itself. It's important to remember that the storefront should be a reflection of the tenant's brand. It's not just the glass that displays the retailer's merchandise. It's the overall canvas on which he presents his identity. Done well, the variety and diversity that we seek along the retail edge is largely delivered by the storefronts, not the first floor components of the building facades. The stronger their brand identity, the more diversity along the street and the more authentic a place will feel. On the left, you see three examples of well-done storefronts that deliver distinction and diversity. Soho's Cole Haan store does it within the simple stone frame of the building space. The Montreal Puma store does it by commanding the entire frame, expanding past it with the red box at the top that pins the brand to it. At Clayton Lane in Denver, the frame has been individualized so that each storefront feels like it brands its own chiclet with the simple application of storefront, sign, and awning. On the right, you see two examples of bad storefronts that are not the merchant's fault. At the top, the building piers are too closely spaced, and a landlord's rule has saddled all tenants with identical awnings that eliminate their sign area. At the bottom, inappropriate residential windows, a sill that's too tall, and no sign band zone handcuffs the merchant. Now it's interesting to note that the store behind these windows, the residential windows, is Lucy, the same store that's under the signature orange awning at Clayton Lane. Which do you think is a more successful merchandising opportunity? And more to our point, which do you think supports a better sense of place? Here are a few rules of thumb to follow when designing the retail base in individual storefronts. 1, create the storefront frame as an empty stage on which multiple different sets can be built over time. 2, lay out columns and piers at no less than 15 feet on center and no more than 30 feet on center. Spacing across the facade relates to the storefront depth in a merchandising plan. 3, columns and piers should generally be no more than 3 feet wide. Double piers are needed at facade property lines or fake property lines, so be careful of width. 4, not all structural columns need to be expressed on the facade. Some can be left unfaced and become part of the tenant's storefront. 5, be clear about which ground floor components belong to the building identity and which belong to the storefront. Often the storefront will not be constructed at the same time as the building. It comes later and is often designed by the tenant's architect. Design guidelines should require tenants to spend as much of their TI dollar in the public realm as possible. 6, storefront bases should be as low as possible, 8 inches to 20 inches, and should generally be part of the tenant's expression, not the building's expression. I see this mistake made all the time. 7, storefronts are generally 14 feet to 20 feet in height with 12-foot minimum ceilings, so be aware of this vertical scale when proportioning the facade. 8, sign bands should be designed into the building expression or the storefront expression, so don't forget the sign area nor the awnings. And finally, think of the storefront windows as having a depth of 4 to 6 feet. This interior display zone is usually often controlled by the landlord and thought about by the designer. Define it and its lighting in a tenant handbook. Storefronts can disappear entirely in restaurant conditions. This can be done in most climates as long as there are a few months for alfresco dining. The relationship between restaurant and public space is symbiotic. The dining improves the ambiance of the public space, and the space improves the ambiance of the restaurant. On Newbury Street, Sansi offers a good example of a folding panel storefront that completely retracts to link diners with a narrow sidewalk, even though there's no exterior dining space available. At Cipriani in Soho, they recess the folding panels so that the in but out zone exists even when the storefront is not folded away. Such a disappearing storefront can also be accomplished with sliding panels or overhead garage doors. Integral to the design of storefronts and retail facades is signage. Signage offers a great opportunity to create diversity and authenticity, impart an image of quality, and enhance brand presentation. There are a number of basic sign types, and you should plan wall area for all of them and encourage your tenants to provide different types. The most basic types are wall signs and blade signs. Wall signs can be individual letters or script or logos. Prohibit or discourage box signs if you can. Blade signs are imperative to use on narrow streets or where pedestrian view is limited to side approaches. Watch out for shared neutral piers between stores where tenants must fight for that sign location. Banners are a sort of blade sign that can sometimes simply carry festive color. And of course, you should write tenant guidelines to guard against signs that are poorly made and overwhelm the building facade and storefront. What makes the branded treatment of the Michigan Avenue Burberry facade good and the home of Easy Credit bad? It's hard to define in signage regulations, but like Justice Potter Stewart's comment about pornography, I know bad signage when I see it. Canopies and awnings can also be leveraged to deliver variety and diversity along the retail edge and to carry signage or trade dress colors. Awnings can be with or without sides and with or without valances. They can be fixed or adjustable, but crank-out awnings usually impart a less upscale look and sag and stain more readily. I prohibit them. Canopies can be made of any solid material, but metal or glass canopies are the most prevalent. They can also be used to carry signage along their face or have blade signs hung from them. Marquees, particularly at cinemas and hotels, are their own category of canopy. Design guidelines should recognize and encourage them as a viable part of a visually active retail edge. Although canopies, awnings, and marquees are usually part of a tenant's work, I'd advise you to designate zones for them on the building facades and to include them in your presentation drawings. Use made-up store names for store signage, never retail, retail, retail. Have fun inventing store names that remind people of real stores and thus lend an air of authenticity to the drawings. Elkis Manfredi does this very well, and Dennis Elaine, who used to work here, was very clever with this. My favorite was, instead of Bed Bath & Beyond, he drew in a sign for Home, Hearth, and Hereafter. Let's move from the vertical plane of the active retail edge to the horizontal plane, the sidewalk. The most successful retail sidewalks are those which establish delineated zones to encourage and support common pedestrian activities. When zoning the pedestrian sidewalk, I like to use the acronym SHOP, S-H-O-P, to represent the 4 zones: storefront, hallway, outdoor, and parking. These zones should be clearly articulated with varying pavement colors, with varying pavement patterns, colors, and/or materials, so that the pedestrian has visual clues that will influence his use of the sidewalk. The storefront zone is 1 to 3 feet wide. It allows customers to enter and exit the stores and to stop and window gaze. The hallway zone is 4 to 8 feet wide. It's a clear walkway that allows pedestrians to move from store to store. The outdoor zone is 4 to 8 feet. It's used for cafe seating, street furniture, light poles, trees, landscaping, and even public art. The parking zone is 1 to 8 feet. It's a buffer. It includes the curb and allows for the opening of car doors. Parallel parking protects the pedestrians and slows traffic, making the sidewalks feel safer. Bulb outs allow space for handicap curb cuts and emphasize corners, crosswalks, and the continuity of pedestrian travel lines. Good retail sidewalks are usually a minimum of 12 feet overall. 15 to 16 is better. 20 to 30 is appropriate for major shopping streets. On the slide, you see the internal 4 to 6 foot merchandising zone that's, as I said, subject to stricter landlord design guidelines, review, and approval. In the outdoor zone, a strong rhythm of street trees with large canopies will add vertical structure to the street section and create shady spots. The bottom of the tree canopy should be a minimum of 6 feet tall to avoid injuring pedestrians and blocking views of the storefronts and signs. Leaves should ideally be small so that sunlight is dappled and signage isn't hidden. Investing in an initial caliper size of 4 inches or more helps with limb height and creates an ambiance of permanence. Salvaged older large trees make great accent planting and park planting. Although retailers are sometimes concerned about trees blocking their storefronts, University of Washington studies show that people have a higher quality place perception of and are willing to spend up to 10% more money in shopping districts with trees than in those without them. Include electrical power at major thoroughfare trees for holiday lighting. Tree species labels can be included as an educational component. They denote pride and care and encourage people to linger. Seasonal plantings and year-round beds soften hardscape and add color. Flower baskets, hedges, and trained vines add visual interest, soften architecture, and hide utilities and service elements. Streetlights should also be placed in the outdoor zone. They should be shielded and warm in color temperature. Light poles should be decorative and distinct to the place if possible. They should be proportionate in size and height to the width of the streets and the sidewalks. And don't forget the banner and planter brackets. Along those streets with parallel parking, integrate the tree spacing and the streetlight spacing with the parking layout to avoid car door interference. Many municipalities require 22-foot parallel parking spaces, so the ideal spacing of alternate trees and poles is 22 feet. The resulting 44-foot spacing of streetlights coordinates well with a 12-foot tall pole. Although most of your parking will likely be in perimeter garages and hopefully hidden from view, it's important to have some curbside parking. It visually advertises the availability of parking. Its almost always full spaces advertise the place's popularity, and it protects the pedestrians from moving traffic, both psychologically and actually. I always advocate against diagonal parking. It blocks views of the storefronts more completely. The headlights diagonally facing the pedestrians is subconsciously threatening, and it forces the exiting driver to look backwards across the longest diagonal of the car, thus slowing their exit. It is somehow less annoying to wait for a car to enter a space that you can't have than it is waiting for a car to exit a space that you want. A streetscape is enhanced by well-chosen and carefully located street furnishings and accessories. Think about and locate these as you design. Benches, bollards, bike racks, trash containers, tree grates, and sign kiosks all provide needed functional amenities and can work together in a visually cohesive way. Custom castings can help brand a district and enhance a place's distinctive character. And as the photo on the right shows, be careful with bench location and position. Now let's move inward from the streets towards the heart of the retail district and the plaza. The scale of this space and its relationship to the active retail edge is critical. Whenever cars are brought in, a plaza should be directly connected to the retail edge on at least one side. 2 is better. If pedestrians are forced to cross traffic to access a plaza that's completely surrounded by traffic, its use will be severely compromised. If traffic is minimal or can be limited to things like valet use, raising a street bed to achieve flush curbs and changing its surface to unit pavers will work well. We saw traditional European examples of this in last week's lecture. Here I show you 2 examples of plazas that have recently spent a lot of money to be changed to achieve this important connection. At the top, New York's Herald Square conducted an experiment closing off a section of Broadway to link the isolated triangle to the frontage of Macy's. It was so successful that these changes are now being made permanent. And London's Trafalgar Square underwent major reconstruction to link it to the National Gallery Museum, a successful project that's resulted in increased use and the square of the square and has increased its ability to host events. There are tons of other retail placemaking issues to consider. Lighting and fountains, location for customer service and toilets, locations for restaurants, anchor retails, and large-scale entertainment tenants like cinemas and nightclubs. The merchandise plan. In mixed-use environments, the best spot for residential entries and office entries. And don't forget the Christmas tree. The biggest planning issue is usually car circulation, service access, trash removal, and parking. It always seems it's parking, 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 parking. These subjects are an entire lecture in and of themselves, so I don't have time for them this morning. So I'd like to conclude with an example of how the retail placemaking principles and planning for activities all come together in one project, and I'll use GID's High Street Atlanta mixed-use project, for which Elkis Manfredi is the master planner and design architect, as my guinea pig this morning. On the screen, you see a few renderings of phase 1 of the project, currently under development. Get Rob Halter to show you our animated fly-through video if you want to see more. The master plan consists of 5 distinct zones or precincts. The Gateway District, conceived as the main public face with a hotel and office building located along the main traffic spine and directly across from the MARTA light rail station. The High Street District, conceived as a wide double-loaded shopping street of larger stores and buildings. The Market District, where the street splits around 2 festival marketplace pavilions. The Green District, which is with a 3/4 acre park at its center. And the Crescent District, with a crescent-shaped plaza, miniature version of the Spanish Steps to negotiate a 20-foot grade change, and an egg-shaped plaza serving as the focus for our office buildings and north garage. We did everything we could to make these districts distinct from each other, but nonetheless hang together. And I'll quickly show you some of the reference places that we were inspired by and benchmarked ourselves against as we developed and refined the master plan. At the Gateway District, we marked a major corner with an office tower point building and bellied a hotel right up to the curve of the bordering street to contrast in a decidedly urban way with the more suburban setback office parks in the area. We were inspired by and benchmarked ourselves against urban edges at London's Westbury Circus and at the Crescent in Bath, for instance. We wanted the High Street District to be distinguished by a double-loaded avenue with wider sidewalks and a narrower and taller container ratio with larger facade segments. We were inspired by and benchmarked ourselves against great shopping streets like the magnificent Mile section of Chicago's Michigan Avenue and certain sections of streets like London's Oxford Street. The Market District is distinguished by, what else? A public market. We consciously kept these low, two-story single-use pavilion-type buildings with pitched roofs so that they would be seen as objects within the larger void. We split them in 2 so that a center plaza could support outdoor events and performers. And we were inspired by and benchmarked ourselves against Boston's Quincy Market and at the spot where High Street splits around the market by the scenographic condition at Charleston's City Market. In the Green District, we looked to spaces like Rome's Piazza Navona, which is 175 feet wide by 820 feet long and contains 3 major fountains. High Street's central space is also 175 feet wide. It's 1,100 feet long in total and includes the 2 market pavilions within that dimension. It's 600 feet long at the park, plus 500 at the markets. We were also inspired by long, narrow parks like Clyde Warren Park in Dallas. At the Crescent District, we have our focal plaza and a 20-foot vertical grade change to deal with. This gave us the opportunity to put in 2-story retail, since both levels are technically on grade, and to make the public realm climb the hill in a distinct and memorable way. We were inspired by and benchmarked ourselves against the similar Crescent Plaza at Reston Town Center, and of course the Spanish Steps, although our steps are much smaller in size. We designed them to have designated sitting and walking zones, and looking to provide a point marker at the top of the steps similar to the obelisk in Rome, we cribbed Post Office Square's flagpole. In the Park and Crescent District, the Park and Crescent District comprise our phase 1, and you see its site plan on the screen. We had the pleasure of engaging Biederman Development Ventures, BRV, as a consultant to help us plan and budget the programming of that space, which we imagined as a vibrant and active public space that synergistically interacts with the retail stores, apartments, and office space that we're building around it. Dan Biederman is the guy responsible for the renovation and reprogramming of Bryant Park. Since I have experience in the planning of these developments, and I'm quite familiar with how the physical plant and the unprogrammed and programmed activities work together, I'd already laid in many of the facilities that others sometimes overlook. Dan was quite complimentary and basically said, "Why are you hiring me? You've already done everything." Things like wide zone sidewalks and parallel parking, nooks and arcades for dining terraces, public toilets, a concierge, a public man cave, lounge and conference room, valet drop-off areas with quick access to garages, a security office, management space, back-of-house maintenance space, and the like. I'd planned and manipulated the routes pedestrians would take from parking, and I'd given a great deal of attention to the public realm experience in general. We have a retail tenant handbook that will compel store tenants to develop distinctive storefronts and signage and lighting, and I'd even projected a couple of food kiosks in the park. When Dan and his team came on, they asked us about our concepts for the space and about our market area. They got a general sense of our construction and operational budgets, although, truth be told, since we didn't yet know what those budgets would support, they were very rough. They also sat down with Elkis Manfredi and with OJB, our landscape architect, and they'd worked with both before. They then produced a questionnaire and a list of possible activities that might happen in this district. They conducted a few focus groups in the area, recruiting folks from among the office tenants in the buildings that are currently on and around the site, asking them what activities would compel them to visit and getting a sense of their daily habits. From the focus group reactions, we narrowed the list and started planning specific facilities. The result is the programming map that's on the screen. In a quick review from left to right, you'll see that we have designated spaces for an outdoor bar. It will take over an adjacent cornhole and bocce game grove after 5 p.m., a fenced dog park, a central event lawn capable of supporting larger yoga classes and concerts and movie nights, a pavilion plaza that's the hard surface needed for the stages and the screen, a children's playground with an immediately adjacent splash fountain that's strategically placed opposite a seating and meeting grove, and food kiosk. Across our North Street, the restaurant-lined Crescent Plaza will support outdoor dining and street performers whose audience can sit on the steps. There's even a spot designated for the all-important Christmas tree. The parallel parking spaces on the long left-right streets can be home for food trucks on special occasions. BRB then prepared a list of support facilities that will need to handle all the back-of-house needs that allow the public open space to function well. They also prepared a staffing list of what employees or third-party contract help that they anticipate. And they've started to think about possible sponsorship opportunities that might bankroll some activities and revenue streams that might spin off from them that should, over time, make the dense programming of the space at worst cost neutral. On the screen is a bar chart that they use to show how the revenues from event fees, restaurant rent, assessments, concessions, government support, and sponsorships at the fabulously successful Bryant Park have grown over the years. Since Bryant Park is a privately operated public park, it was initially supported by a little bit of public money. There's no public money involved now, which is just the way Dan Biederman likes it. The Bryant Park operations are a version of a BID, BID, Business Improvement District, financed by assessments levied on the surrounding properties. Dan is very proud that those assessments, shown in yellow, have remained somewhat constant and are a smaller and smaller percentage of their total budgets every year. The success of the place in BRV's programming strategy is demonstrated by the growth in event fees, rents, and sponsorships, shown in blue, green, and maroon segments of each bar. There's plenty more to it, but I've already talked about an hour on activities, so I will conclude. Next week, I'll end this series with a talk about sense of place, what we mean by that term. Is it real or just marketing jargon? And I urge you all to attend. Thank you.